I went to Penn State, which, relatively speaking, is in a pretty rural area and almost completely surrounded by trees. The town of State College itself is real nice, and I know this might make me sound like a douche, but I'm from Manhattan, so the younger me thought the relative isolation was pretty lame initially. At least that was until I actually got out onto some of the trails with a classmate of mine. Then, over the course of maybe 3 or 4 months, I developed a huge passion for the outdoors. My friends back home were stunned, as they'd never have guessed in a million years that I'd turn out to be one of those trail-hungry hiking enthusiasts that we only ever usually saw on our Insta timelines. I think it was all down to having hiked up and down the Loyalsock Trail, which was about an hour's drive away from my area. My buddy ended up inviting me this one time, and I was just bored out of my mind, so I figured I'd join him. Little did I know that, but a few months later, I'd be suggesting that we hike the whole 50-something miles of the trail over the course of 4 or 5 days. My roomie turned hiking buddy used to be an Eagle Scout, so he had way more experience in the woods than I did. Nighttime on our first few trips basically consisted of me hearing spooky noises like coyotes, raccoons, or owls, then freaking out until he assured me that there was really nothing to be scared of. He always said there were really only 2 things you had to worry about out in Pennsylvania: black bears and bobcats. Everything else you would more or less deal with. But later, on our 4-day hiking trip through Loyalsock, we found out that there's something else you should worry about when in the middle of nowhere, and that's other people. By the end of day 2 of our trip, we're about 20 miles into the trail, and with us being in a particularly dense part of Loyalsock, we're able to pitch our tent in this real secluded spot about 100 yards off the trail. It was next to impossible to spot our campsite while walking on the trail, so we thought we were pretty safe in that respect. Only thing was, the spot we picked out was a kind of miniature peninsula where a creek met a river, so although that was great for getting fresh water, it meant that there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. Anyway, we set up camp, started a fire, cooked ourselves some food, then took turns sipping a little sour mash while we watched the fire burn down. By the time it was just embers, all was quiet, apart from the ambient forest noises, of course, and since it was coming to the end of spring, it was just about warm enough to make for comfortable sleeping. I know I slept for at least a few hours because one minute it was coming up on midnight, and the next time I checked my watch, it was just past 2 in the morning. I rolled over in my sleeping bag, then tried to get back to sleep, but then the next thing I know, I'm hearing the really faint sound of people talking, and it sounded like it was coming from the direction of the trail. My first thought was, who hikes at 2 in the morning? And when I realized that they weren't actually passing us and were just hanging around on the trail near our campsite, I started to get really nervous. I mean, we were in the middle of nowhere by that point, and the nearest town was maybe 3 or 4 miles away. If anything happened to us all the way out there, we'd basically be screwed. I slowly get out of my sleeping bag, then slowly unzip my tent, trying to make as little noise as possible. And then the second I emerge from my tent, I see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same way. The moon was really bright that night, and although I couldn't exactly see him perfectly, I could see enough to know that as soon as I looked at him, he basically moved a finger to his mouth, telling me to keep quiet. Then he used the same hand to motion in the direction of the trail. Seconds later, the voices go silent, but they're replaced by the sound of footsteps getting louder and louder as whoever it was got closer and closer to us. Then, we see them. There were 4 dark shapes moving slowly and quietly directly towards our camp. They had no lights. They're obviously trying not to be heard, and although I couldn't quite tell how big they were or what they looked like, the fact they outnumber us was enough to have me straight up panicking. I shot back inside my tent, not really caring if they could hear me at that point, and immediately grabbed the survival knife that I kept stashed under my bedroll. It wasn't much in terms of something to defend myself with, as the blade was only maybe 3 inches long, but it was either that or just rely on my fists. We were then forced to watch as the dark shapes walked right up onto our campsite. Then all just stood there for a moment before my buddy finally switched on his flashlight and shined it in their direction. Instantly, this one guy was like, "Get that flashlight off me." But I got a good enough look at the group to know that they were not your average happy-go-lucky trail walkers. I then asked the group what they wanted, and they didn't answer us for a few seconds. They just sort of looked at each other in the low light before the same guy spoke up again, asking if we had any food to spare. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we only had a few extra Mountain House MRE-style meals. I remember neither of us responded at first, and I know we both had a really bad feeling that these people wanted way more than just food. But eventually, I kind of backed up in my tent and fished around for one of my MREs, which I then tossed in front of the group while still holding my survival knife tight in my hand. I think my suspicions were pretty much confirmed when one of the group just picked the food up and held on to it. You'd think that someone hungry enough to beg for food would just devour any given to them right then and there. But these guys didn't seem even remotely appreciative or in need of the food we gave them. They obviously wanted something else. After we gave them the food, I didn't think that they'd just thank us and walk away, and I was proven right on that one. The group of four just stood there in complete silence as the tension in the air ramped up. The silence was only broken again when my buddy asked them why they were out so late. They told us it was better to hike late at night, which is most definitely not true. Then, when we asked them why they weren't using a flashlight, they told us that they didn't need one, and that they knew the trail well enough to navigate it in the darkness. Now, on paper, this might sound like harmless, even friendly conversation, but I can promise you, the tone of the guy's voice, who was the only one who ever spoke, was definitely not friendly. It was this dry, emotionless tone, with just a hint of mischief to it, almost like the guy was enjoying the fact that he could hear anxiety in our voices. He then asked us if we had any money, and although we had a couple of bucks each on us to spend when we finished our hike, we just told them no because we knew they'd just asked to have it. The guy is then like, "You sure you don't have any money?" Then before we can even answer, one of the other shapes speaks up and asks, "You guys got any girls with you?" That one really sent a chill through me. No man has ever asked that question with innocent intentions, and it gave us both an idea of what the group were really after. After telling them no, I really wanted to just ask them to leave, but at the same time I knew doing so would be a show of complete weakness. It was basically a standoff at that point. Either we did something to actually get them to want to leave, or they might just hang around until they got tired of checking us out and got to do something we really wouldn't want them to do. But right as I can feel myself starting to literally shake with adrenaline, my buddy says something like, "So you guys don't have food, don't keep a flashlight. Do you guys even have a gun?" At the word gun, each of the shapes turns to look in the direction of my buddy's tent. They didn't say anything in response. They just looked as if waiting for my buddy to produce one. We didn't actually have a gun with us at the time, just a can of bear mace for any wild animal encounters, but that didn't stop my buddy from talking a good game. "You guys don't have a gun," he continued. "Dude, it's not safe out here without one. I hear black bears get real hungry around this time of the year, so we always make sure to come here packing. Isn't that right?" I ended up murmuring something in the affirmative just to keep up the charade. Then I listened to my buddy yammering on nervously about how he was packing a rifle and a pistol, while I had a shotgun stashed in my tent. Again, I just agreed and went along with it, and started to feel real hopeful when one of the shadowy group took the tiniest step backwards, as if they hadn't been expecting us to be armed. A few more moments of silence passed before one of the shapes who hadn't spoke yet whispered something really low to his group. I couldn't hear exactly what it was, but I can take a real good guess. But seconds later, the main guy said something like, "Well, we'd love to stay and talk, but I think we should be on our way." I breathed a huge sigh of relief at hearing that. Not literally, of course, but knowing we might have talked our way out of a very sticky situation was just a weight off my shoulders. As the group walked off, my buddy kept up the confident facade and then told them something like, "Well, that's a shame, but feel free to come back and visit during daylight tomorrow. It sure would be nice to see all your faces." "Yeah, maybe we'll do that," the guy responded, and I swear you could hear the frustration in his voice. They were obviously hoping we were just a couple of clueless hikers, which I suppose is exactly what we were, and that they were planning on either robbing us, beating us, or something bad like that. And they couldn't risk it if we had guns though, and they knew it. Even if they had ones themselves, they must have been relying on the prospect of us being unarmed, scared, and helpless. You know, as they say, have a monopoly on violence. As soon as they were out of sight, we got to packing up our camp as quickly and quietly as we could. At one point, I remember whispering to my buddy about how they might still be watching or listening to us, and this was his cue to start bluffing again. He started talking loudly about how much ammo we had left, how I should be careful with that shotgun as we were packing up. He even threw out, "Those guys were lucky I didn't just light them up as soon as they walked into camp. I don't know what the hell they were thinking rolling up in the middle of the night like that." I definitely felt a little more nervous at how seemingly confrontational he was being, but if it gave us a fighting chance of getting out of there without having to fight, it was good enough for me. To this day, what happened that night remains the creepiest, most unnerving thing that's ever happened to me on a hiking trip, and I've been on so many that I've literally lost count at this point. I'll always bring a gun with me these days, whenever I'm able to anyway, because, God forbid, if anything like that ever happens again, I don't want to have to bluff about being able to protect myself. I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. To be honest, after a while I also wasn't scared anymore since he almost never came close to me. I know being stalked can affect people severely even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I just got lucky and was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts, such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to, or really tried, to be honest, to catch or identify him. About 3 weeks ago, I discovered the German version of r/IMA and thought that people might want to know about what it's like having a stalker. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think that he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Doesn't he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered, maybe. Maybe it would make him angry. Maybe he'd be turned on. I don't know. Don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he did not like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive and never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of my steps above. Sorry if that doesn't make sense, I'll continue to explain here, but I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. I don't know how he got wind of the AMA, but he did. The next week was quiet. No letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my questions from the AMA. He also left me a long, hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue I had posted on the German version of AITA. His letters were never hateful like that, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later, I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No. This time, he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment, but opened it up outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm typing it out, I realized that it wasn't a good idea at all, and could have ended really badly for me, but lucky he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, nothing you could use to restrain someone, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of Band-Aids with a few used ones, not actually, just made to look like that way according to the police, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out the photo. The frame was shattered and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumpled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and gave it to them. They were more concerned this time, finally, thank God, and told me that they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago, it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago, I left my apartment in the morning and I heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it in the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and was just going to make my boyfriend call the police, but then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, lights smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on it. "It's time soon, miss," and then my last name. I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just angry at that point, which I made very clear. If for some reason you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, gifts, photos, even the glass under my doormat, are just really annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless to me now, and the threat actually scared me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police said they'd take the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't of high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good as before, but they said it's not enough. And they told me that they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. And then it was quiet for 2 more days. Until 2 days ago, someone rang the doorbell at just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant, but I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up, I heard them shouting, "This is the police. Please open the door." They told us that they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors who came home from his night shift about a few hours earlier and heard someone else enter the building after them right before they felt the door shut. My neighbors know of my situation and I asked them to make sure that they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairways, so he waited to see if they turned back on, and they did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor is only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 a.m., so we called the police. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop cars since there's a little window up there, and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him, and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. For now, at least. He's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now, I've finally got some peace. I'm a 28-year-old female and have lived in the same apartment for 4 years. My neighbors in the unit above me are a couple in their 30s who have lived there for about 3 years with no issues between us. During the past 6 months, I've noticed some changes in their behaviors. At first, it was just a few days per week. I'd hear music with heavy bass accompanied by rhythmic jumping. I assume they bought an exercise bike or something, but sometimes the jumping gets so intense that it shakes my overhead light fixtures. The jumping routine has been escalating to the point that it takes place every day, normally between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. I also noticed that they called 1-800-JUNK and got rid of a lot of nice possessions. However, I figured none of this was my business, so I kept my observations to myself. About 3 weeks ago, everything escalated. Multiple times per week, on weekdays and during working hours, it sounds like they're hosting a mini Burning Man event in their apartment. The music is so loud and clear that it sounds as if though I'm at a concert while sitting in my living room. There's clearly a lot of people involved because the jumping and stomping shakes multiple light fixtures and cabinets. The music is a mix of new age and spiritual vibes, dance beats, and a male voiceover giving weird instructions like rebrand yourself, surrender yourself, stomp stomp in response. I've taken audio recordings on my phone and one video from the hallway during these events, and I still didn't complain to the building, but I wanted evidence in case it became a regular thing. This week, I've encountered a big problem. The couple above me has a private patio which is directly above my bedroom. I came home from a 3-day trip out of town yesterday and my ceiling is legitimately collapsing in one corner. Big chunks of plaster had fallen to the ground and I saw a little water. I immediately called my superintendent since I don't want to be buried alive by ceiling rubble if it gives out. When he came to check it out, he was shocked and livid. He said that the woman in the couple appears to be working with some people doing workshops or something. He can see their patio from his apartment window and has watched the group do these dancing and jumping and dirt rituals out there on a weekly basis. He said they all dance and jump to the music and then spread dirt, along with something else, he doesn't know what it is, across the patio on a weekly basis. He believes that the dirt, or this unknown substance combination, is getting through the wooden cracks, absorbing water, and weighing down my ceiling. In order to fix my problem, my super has said that he had to go talk to the woman, check out their patio, and ultimately hire a contractor to pull up the wood to scrape out whatever the hell is causing my ceiling to fall. I could hear them talking from my room, and the woman sounded distraught and defensive. When my super left, he called me and warned me that she might try to come down to my apartment and demand to see the damage, but don't let her in. This was a little concerning to me. Is she a threat? The damage is real, I wouldn't mind showing her. She started playing her music again relatively loud, kind of like a warning shot. I mentioned the music and jumping to the super and said that I had audio recordings, and he started begging me to send the evidence to the front office. It sounds like he wants them evicted. I said, okay, sure. I hate to be a rat, but if I had to choose sides, I'd side with the building that dictates my annual rent price. And he called me twice more that afternoon to confirm that I'd shared my evidence, and I said yes. Shortly after everything went down, I left my apartment to run an errand. The woman was outside just standing on the sidewalk and stared at me the whole time as I walked by. I ignored her. This isn't my fault. Now today, I went to run another quick errand in the neighborhood, and when I returned, the couple was again standing on the sidewalk, both of them this time, and they followed me into the building and then waited until I was opening my apartment door to confront me. They were both wearing creepy fake smiles. The woman has horse girl hair down to her waist and started interrogating me. They asked, "Is your ceiling really collapsing? When did it start? Do you think it was related to the recent rainfall? Because our patio is just fine." I was a little uncomfortable. Were they waiting for me outside? How did they know that I even left the building? Why were they both standing there? I've literally never seen them enter together in their 3 years of living here. But I have nothing to hide, so I confirmed the damage is pretty bad. I just don't want it to fall during the winter. And I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but hopefully the work will be done quickly for everyone's sake. They seemed satisfied enough, so I said for them to have a good day and shut my door. I'm getting the sense that they're nervous about what the contractors will find when they tear open their patio. I mean, what the F is up with the dirt rituals? Who are these people that she's working with? I don't know what they look like or why they're available to stomp around on weekdays. The repair work has started on both sides, but the contractors will come on Wednesday for the grand reveal of what's under the patio that's making my ceiling collapse. In the meantime, I feel like I need to be alert and keep my eyes out for these people, as well as the couple. It's unusual for me to see them in general, especially twice in 2 days. They seem scared and in denial of the problem. They also literally ambushed me and hopefully it's over soon. My only question is, do I live below a cult leader? And did I just anger them? Update. The contractors came today and reported that there was, in fact, dirt and sludge visible below the neighbor's patio. However, thanks to the help of my internet sleuthing friend, I've gained a lot more insight into the realm that dwells above me. As one Redditor suggested, and nice work, my neighbor is affiliated with multiple ecstatic dance communities, both international and local. The international group has planned events during which all cells of the organization host dance sessions simultaneously. It also has a YouTube channel that streams psytrance music 24/7. I've listened to a portion of it, and a female voiceover declared, "You are becoming the Game Master." Meanwhile, the local groups seem to be more exclusive and more radical in their mindset. One of the local groups, hosted by my neighbor's good friend, conducts 3-day events that cost upwards of $400 for admission. Participation in all 3 days is mandatory. I get the impression they all sleep in the studio space, and the event description mentions that it begins with a ritual. The last and darkest affiliation that I've confirmed via social media footprints is that my neighbor and a few members of the local communities are also involved with some compassionate death groups. There's no way for me to verify at this time if these affiliations overlap in a meaningful way, so I will simply state the facts that I have evidence to prove. My super asked me about the jumping again when I saw him today. He remains eager to act. He agreed with my new game plan to wait for another large event to happen and then call him to check on my dishwasher so he can intervene. So for now, the ways in which the puzzle pieces of ecstatic dance, compassionate death, patio dirt rituals, and ceiling collapse connect will remain a mystery. I've been meaning to post this here for a while, and I wrote my first draft back in April, so it's taken a long time and a lot of therapy for me to be able to think about this experience. I've noticed how many people's stories take place over weeks, months, even years, so I'm here to tell you that mine was 12 hours of my life. I managed to block out a lot of the memories surrounding this night, but early this year I was mugged and my PTSD returned, as did a lot of the missing memories of those 12 hours. This is the first time I'm telling anyone the full story of what happened to me. I haven't told my partner, my therapist, my parents. No one knows the details. If there's anything that should be taken away from my story, it's this. Remember that you don't need to be polite to everyone you meet. In October 2018, I was age 18 in my first year at university in a big city in the UK. I had always lived in the countryside before this, so was never very street smart. About a year before I went to university, I had started a relationship with this guy, Jimmy, now my ex. It was my first real relationship and I thought the world of him, but it was not reciprocated in a loving and compassionate way. Jimmy started off as very emotionally abusive and got progressively worse, but that's a whole other story. At this point, Jimmy and I had been together just under a year and had applied to universities in the same city mostly by coincidence, and both moved to the same city. I wanted to have a proper student life, so got accommodations in a student block on the other side of the city to him. Jimmy had been using drugs for quite a while, initially starting off just smoking weed, but this progressed rapidly, and by the time we were at uni, he was regularly doing a lot of hard drugs, plus smoking weed multiple times a day. Honestly, I don't think he was ever not high. When we moved to university, we still saw each other every couple of days, and he found a regular drug dealer, Mark, that had been using continually since we got there in September. Jimmy used to buy from Mark multiple times a week, so on a handful of occasions I had briefly met him. Mark lived a lot closer to my student accommodation than to Jimmy's, so a couple of weeks before this all happened, Jimmy had started picking up drugs from Mark when he came to see me, meaning Mark would often be outside of my accommodation. Jimmy had asked me a few times if I would pick up the drugs that he bought from Mark, but I always felt weird speaking to Mark on my own. Plus, I rarely smoked weed, so I felt very weird picking up drugs in general. 6 p.m. One day, at the end of October, Jimmy had plans to come and see me that evening and asked me again if I would pick up some weed from Mark. I was in a good mood that day and feeling more confident than usual, so for the first time I agreed to it. Jimmy gave me Mark's number and said that Mark would message me when he was on his way. Only around 10 minutes later, I got a message from Mark saying that he was nearly outside my apartment and I needed to go outside, so I did. Outside of my accommodation, there was a quieter area with a lot of benches, so I sat and waited for him. Behind me was only a wall and a small contained area that had all of the bins for the building. Out of nowhere, I felt someone's hands on my shoulders in a really weird, creepy way. I jumped, obviously, and realized that it was Mark, who I barely recognized as I had only briefly seen him a couple of times. I realized now that my back had been to the wall and the bin storage, so he must have been waiting there. I was immediately on guard because of how he touched my shoulders, especially because I didn't know him. So I shifted away from him as he sat down next to me. He began talking to me as if we were buddies, asking me 1,000,001 questions about myself, like deeply personal questions. The whole time I was deflecting, not wanting to give out any information, so I started asking him questions instead. He began a really deep monologue about himself and his life, where he openly told me that he had just gotten out of prison a few months before. It was for armed something, some kind of violent crime. I engaged his ramblings, just nodding along, but still trying to get back to the whole point of just picking up drugs for my boyfriend. 7 p.m. I've always been able to talk to anyone and was always taught to be nice when someone is talking, so I ended up sitting there for around an hour trying to get the conversation back to the reason I was there, pick up drugs for my boyfriend and go. It was so long that it actually started getting dark. This guy just kept talking. I knew my boyfriend was going to be coming over soon, so I kept looking at my phone to see if he was on his way, but he hadn't replied. Eventually, I told Mark that I needed to get back inside as I was meeting up with my boyfriend soon, and then going clubbing after with some friends, so I needed to get ready, and I could just please pick up those drugs. He then said, "Oh, well, I can't give them to you here. There's CCTV everywhere. We can go inside and I'll give them to you, okay?" I had witnessed him giving my boyfriend drugs in that same spot countless times before, so I knew this was nonsense. I didn't want Mark to come back to my apartment, so I told him that he could go into the lobby of my building where there was a disabled bathroom, and he could give them to me there. He agreed and followed me inside. He went into the bathroom. It was a very large room, so I didn't have to be too close to him, and he locked the door behind us. He then began fiddling with something in his pocket. I assumed the drugs, but instead pulled down his trousers, fully, and started peeing in the toilet. I was hugely freaked out. This guy just presented his entire self to me and began peeing. But I rationalized that there was no way that he had any sort of motive because he had just met me and my boyfriend together, so he knew that I was in a relationship. I figured that he just really needed to pee. I had kept my eyes shut the whole time, and when he flushed, I thought that he would finally give me the drugs that I was there to collect, and this whole thing had been going on for about an hour and a half by this point. He said, "I really want to roll myself a joint, but there's no space in here to do it. Can I come and roll it on your desk and then I'll give you Jimmy's stuff?" I asked again if he could just give it to me now, and he said no, saying that I was being rude for not inviting him in. By this point, I was wanting to get ready to go out with friends later that evening and knew my boyfriend would be coming by any minute, so figured that it'd be okay, even though I didn't want this. It's worth noting that I was emotionally abused by my boyfriend and knew that he would be mad at me if I didn't collect his drugs or if I annoyed Mark because he was his favorite dealer. I honestly figured that Mark was harmless, despite him telling me that he was a violent criminal, FML, and just assured myself that he was only a bit creepy and it would be fine. 8 p.m. Reluctantly, I took Mark up to my apartment, opened the door and let him in. I said that he had to roll his joint fast because I had to get ready. Finally, he gave me the drugs that my boyfriend wanted, so I felt better at that point. He walked over to my desk, moved all my things to the side and sat down, getting out the things to roll his joint. I cannot roll a joint, but I've seen Jimmy do it countless times, so I know that it doesn't take more than a minute or so. Mark keeps trying to talk to me, but at this point my answers are getting shorter and shorter. He rolls this joint so slowly I can't even describe it. He then said, "Well, I can't smoke this outside, so Is it cool if I just stay here and smoke it? It'll only take a few minutes to smoke. I said no and told him again that I had to get ready, and he replied, "It's okay. You can get ready with me here." By this point, I was over it. Messaged my boyfriend again to tell him to hurry up. Mark asked me again. In my frustration and wanting this guy out of my apartment, I just said, "Okay, sure, but be quick." I then went out of my room into the shared kitchen. I only had 2 flatmates and no one else was in the apartment that night. I grabbed some wine and a glass so that I could have some solitary pre-drinks and return to my room. I sat for another 15 minutes, being increasingly less polite, but he kept talking to me. I drank my first glass of wine pretty fast, and I just decided if Mark was going to take ages, then I would just get ready to go out with my friends. I told him that as soon as he's finished smoking that he could just leave on his own, so I left him sat at the desk, took some clothes into the bathroom, and jumped into the shower. 9 p.m. Maybe a minute or so into the shower, I heard some soft footsteps outside the door, and like a scene from a freaking horror movie, I saw the door handle slowly being pushed down. Thank God I remembered to lock the door. All of a sudden, Mark began banging on the door. I turned the shower off and just said, hi?" through the door, and he shouted through the door asking to let him in because he needed to pee again. I obviously said no and just got dried and dressed. Thankfully, I took clothes to the bathroom and as fast as I could. By this point, I figured that there was no way that he was going to leave my apartment until I did, so I did my makeup as fast as I physically could and messaged my friend that I'd be coming to theirs sooner than I had planned. I still hadn't got a reply from my boyfriend, so I just told him that I was going out early and not to come over. I got ready to go and told Mark that I was leaving now and he needed to come downstairs with me. He was still sat at my desk and ignored what I was saying. He asked if he could stay in my room while I was out because he was tired and wanted to take a nap. Finally, I was firm with him, and after a lot of convincing, he left with me. I made sure to order an Uber to my friend's place so that he couldn't try and walk with me, and by the time we got outside, my Uber was nearly there. He stood with me, looking over my shoulder at my phone the whole time. Then the Uber arrived. I got into it and Mark straight up walked around the other side and got in. I was in disbelief and laughed, then told the Uber driver that I didn't know who this guy was and that he wasn't getting in with me. The Uber was not as polite as me and told Mark to get out, and he did. 10 p.m. I sat there on the way to my friend's house and finally felt calm that I had gotten away from Mark. I called my friend from the Uber and told her what happened, so she said that she would come outside of her building to get me with a group of her flatmates. My friend's accommodation was not far from mine and took longer to get to by car than on foot because of the one-way system in the city, but I didn't care at this point. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes later I arrived, and my friend came over to my Uber, then brought me back to her group of friends. She had quite a few people with her, and I suddenly noticed that one of her male flatmates was talking to someone slightly away from the group. I looked over and suddenly realized that he was talking to Mark. I guess he was looking at the address when I had the Uber app opened earlier. I whispered to my friend and she freaked out and went inside with me straight away. I was super freaked out that this guy wouldn't just leave me alone. He refused to leave my side for the last few hours and now he had followed me to my friend's house. Honestly, I felt much safer now and met a few creeps in my time, so just decided to get over it by having a nice time with my friend. So we sat in her kitchen having a chat and some drinks. 11 p.m. After a while talking to her, I almost forgot about what happened just an hour ago and was getting increasingly tipsy from the wine. The kitchen door opened and her male flatmate comes inside announcing that he invited a guy in who had given him free weed. And you guessed it, Mark walked in. Mark addressed me by name and walked over, putting his hands around my waist from behind. I get pretty confident when I drink, so I had no problem pushing him off of me, announcing to everyone in a jokey way, "Yeah, this is the guy who's been following me around all evening. Don't even know him." Even in this room with all of my friends' flatmates, I still didn't feel safe, and he stayed away from me, looking at me for a while from the other side of the kitchen, and then I just ignored him. My friend could tell that I was uncomfortable, so they suggested that we go and drink in her room. Around 30 minutes after going into her room, the door slams open suddenly, and Mark is standing there. He says, "Oh, I was looking for the bathroom. Can I use yours?" My friend had an ensuite. She tells him to get the F out, and he does. I'm honestly just bored of this guy's constant presence at this point, so we decided to just go to the club early. Midnight. We grab our stuff, run past the kitchen door and outside. My friend orders us an Uber and we get in and go to the club. After a while, some of her flatmates join us, but Mark does not, thank God. The people who had been in the kitchen said that Mark left shortly after he saw me and my friend leave, but there was no sign of him now. I just try and enjoy the night, but being a poor student, I can't afford any more drinks at the club. As I begin to sober up, I realize how shaken up and creeped out the whole evening had made me, and I don't feel safe. 2 a.m. After only a couple of hours, I decided I just wanted to go home and sleep because this whole experience freaked me out. I take an Uber back, use my key card to get in my apartment building, go upstairs and into my apartment. I started getting ready for bed, put on some PJs and started taking off my makeup. All of a sudden, I hear a loud knock on my door. I had no clue who it was, but since it was still early-ish for a Friday night, I thought that my boyfriend maybe finally decided to show up. My door didn't have a peephole, so I walked to the door in my PJs, unlocked it, planning to open it a tiny bit to see who it was, and then bam. The door flew open so fast that I was pushed backwards into my apartment and then shoved into my room, which was directly across from the front door. In my panic, I froze, then looked up only to realize that Mark was now standing in my apartment. The realization started to sink in. Mark had just forced his way into my room, and I was trapped here with him. He was visibly angry and very high. He locked the door behind him and began rambling about how I was so rude for not inviting him in with my friends, for ignoring him, for not letting him in the Uber, etc. I was terrified, so I ran over to my bed and grabbed my phone. He walked over behind me and began grabbing me, touching me as much as he could, so I shouted at him to get off. He saw my phone in my hand and immediately smiled and told me to open the camera. I was terrified, so I did as he said, and he said he wanted a picture of us together. I did as I was told and took a selfie with him when he posed with his arms around me and then kissing my cheek and my neck. He then screamed at me to unlock my phone, so I did. He made me open up my messages and send Jimmy the selfie of me and Mark sat next to each other on my bed, so I did. He waited for it to send and then grabbed my phone and put it down on the desk. He sat at my desk for the next 4 to 5 hours talking at me continually, saying how I was so rude, I needed someone to teach me some manners, how I had to do what he said because he was older than me, how Jimmy wasn't good enough for me, how I was so beautiful and how he knew that I needed to be with him. He told me that his girlfriend knew that he had been at my house that evening and now she said that he can't go home and it was all my fault. The whole time I continued bargaining with him, trying to get him to leave, but it didn't work. Occasionally I would just lie down on my bed or sit and not speak. Each time I did, he would get up and wrap his arms around me and try and spoon me, stroking my face, trying to kiss me, and trying to take my clothes off and touch me. Every time I fought him off, he would get angry again and go and sit at the desk and keep shouting. I knew that this guy had previously been in prison for some kind of violent crime, and so I didn't want to make him angry. I just sat there for hours and quietly sobbed, too scared of trying to leave because I would have had to have walked past him to get to the door. I was out of options. I didn't know if I could get out without angering him. I couldn't call the police because he had my phone, and my flatmates weren't in, so my screams meant nothing. 6 a.m. While he was sat at my desk, he kept smoking more weed or taking a line of whatever drug, so he's becoming more and more out of it. It was becoming more sleepy as he smoked more weed until I was able to speak between his ramblings, so I gently said that I was going to the bathroom. I noticed that he had his eyes partially closed and figured that I only had one chance, so I took the opportunity and grabbed my phone off the desk as fast as I could, unlocked the door and ran out of the apartment. The only thing I will always remember is being in tears, pressing the button for the elevator to come probably about 50 times because I was so scared that he was going to come after me. As I got into the elevator, I heard him come out of my apartment, shouting my name, but the elevator doors closed as he looked at me. I was able to get downstairs and out of the building. I ran around the corner of the building in my pajamas and manically dialed the number for the police and told them what happened and that this guy had been in prison until recently, and the next thing I knew, around 5 police cars showed up. I was in such a state and called my boyfriend to tell him what happened. He was still awake and hadn't come to visit the night before because he was with a girl who is his friend, and said that now that he didn't want to come to be with me because he had some weed on him and didn't want to be near the police. I told him to get to my place now, and he reluctantly did. The aftermath. The police had to force entry to my apartment because Mark had locked himself in and barricaded the door. They arrested him, and he ended up going to prison for drug charges, but not for what he did or tried to do to me. The police said they couldn't prosecute him because I had willingly let him into my apartment earlier in the night, and he hadn't physically done anything. After I had given my statements to the police, I went back inside to see that after I had escaped, my room was trashed. Mark had thrown things around and mashed things in anger. I'm so glad that I got out when I did because I can't imagine what would have happened if I was trapped in the crossfire. I don't know what happened to Mark after that, but I moved out of that apartment a couple of months later and away from that city as soon as I could when COVID hit to make sure Mark could never find me. I actually stayed in my abusive relationship for another year or so until I realized that I was too good to put up with Jimmy's nonsense. I had such severe PTSD from the incident that I couldn't go outside for months after, which messed up the whole of my first year at university. It has taken until now for me to be able to walk around at night, and being alone in public is still really difficult. I'm well aware that the ending is very anticlimactic, and I wish that I'd been able to advocate for myself, but I just shut down emotionally afterwards. I can't get too much into the details of the assault and all that kind of stuff because honestly, thinking about it makes me want to throw up. But I realized that I was so lucky to be able to fight him off every time because, without a doubt, he wanted to hurt me. After this all happened, I started volunteering with people in prison for these types of crimes to try and prevent them from ever re-offending. I think it's my way of advocating for others because I couldn't advocate for myself. If you take one thing away from me, stop being so polite. I was raised to be nice to everyone, and I realize now that being polite worsened everything. I wish I had never been polite enough to pick up drugs for my ex, or polite enough to let Mark in my apartment when he begged. So to Mark, I hope you rot in prison. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. In my late teens and early 20s, I was friends with a girl named Lucy. She was a very lonely kind of girl whose parents were, well, honestly, really bad. Her mother was verbally abusive and her father really couldn't care less about anything. Because of the lack of love in her life, Lucy searched through dating sites for love and comfort from strange men, and she was not afraid of meeting them face to face even if they'd been chatting for only a few days. My friendship with Lucy was a strange one. I found her quite annoying sometimes, but I also felt awful for her because of her loneliness and lack of friends and love in her life. Sometimes I really didn't want to hang out with her, and some days I would accept her offer to hang out. When it was just her and I together, she was normal and okay to be around, but also very appreciative of having someone giving her attention. We had a small group of friends, and she would try to get all of us together as often as possible, and honestly, the whole group together was really quite fun. When we were all together, Lucy was very hyper, and you could just tell that she was happy to be around people who didn't insult her as much as her mother did. Suddenly, Lucy tells us that she has a boyfriend, and we were all surprised because we knew that she had met a lot of guys online, but we had never heard her say that she was dating someone. A few days later, she sets up a day for our friend group to meet Trevor. None of us were looking forward to it because we thought that he was just going to be like all the others, just some temporary boy toy. When we met him, we all felt kind of awkward. He barely spoke a word. He wouldn't look directly at any of us. Lucy would try to be funny, but he would just give her dirty looks. Needless to say, we thought that he was a weird one and could tell that he didn't care much for her. As the days went on, Lucy kept telling me how much Trevor did not like me. And this was weird because no one ever really did dislike me. I'm always polite, respectful, and I smile a lot at everyone. but for some reason, he did not like me. He kept saying that he thinks I'm using Lucy for her money. Not sure how he thought that since I paid for everything for Lucy. And to keep this piece of the story short, I think he was trying to find reasons to convince her to get rid of me. I got a terrible vibe from Trevor. He dressed like he didn't care about life, and he never smiled. He didn't shake our hands when first meeting us, and he stank of weed and really had an overall uncomfortable feeling about him. After months of Trevor trying to convince Lucy that I am a terrible friend and she should not hang out with me anymore, she started to do as he said. She would start to hide me from him. If she and I were together and he would call her on her phone, she would lie and say that I wasn't there. If she was with a group of friends, he would have her swear that I wasn't there. When he was going to be joining the group on an outing or just hanging out at her place, she would tell me that I couldn't come. Lucy will do whatever a boyfriend says just to keep pleasing him so she doesn't lose them. And now, here's where it gets scary. Lucy calls me one day and says that she wants me to come hang out at her place. I agreed. She came to pick me up, and we went to her house and watched TV for a bit. We then decided that since it's a nice day outside, that we could take her two dogs for a walk to a nearby pocket park and would later return to the house to have lunch together. While at this park, she receives a phone call. Now let me say that Lucy is not a private person whatsoever and has never ever walked away to answer a phone call until this day. She walked far enough away that she knew that I would not be able to hear anything she said. This was suspicious to me, but not enough to question it. The call ends and she begins walking towards me with a look on her face as if she was trying not to smile. She tells me, "So, I need to bring you home now." I was slightly confused as we had only been together for about an hour when we usually spend the entire day together, and she would never want me to go home, and she would even frequently beg me to sleep over to avoid being alone. So anyways, I said okay, and we walked to drop off her dogs at home, and we got into her car and off we went. About 10 minutes into the car ride, I realized that she isn't going in the direction of my house, so I questioned it. "Where are we going?" She smirked, but didn't respond. I asked again, laughing uncomfortably. "Seriously, where are we going?" She continued to smirk, but didn't want to answer. I started to realize that she was heading in the direction of where her boyfriend lived. Oh God, no. And I asked one last time, with anger in my voice, "Where are you taking me?" Her only response was bone-chilling to me. "Trevor wants to talk to you." No. No, I wasn't having any of this. I insisted and demanded that she let me out of the car. But with her evil smirk and same response, she said it again. "It's okay. He just wants to talk to you." I was furious at this point because this creepy guy who looks like he wants to kill someone, who also despised me, wanted to talk to me. Why can't he talk to me on the phone? Why do I need to go to his sketchy apartment? She absolutely refused to let me out of the car. She had the doors locked, as if I wasn't able to unlock my passenger door. I waited until she reached a red light. I grabbed her wallet from the back seat and took out her bus pass and bolted out of the car. I had no idea where I was or where the nearest bus stop was, but I was not about to let her crazy boyfriend do whatever he wanted to me. She yelled for me to get back into the car, but of course I ignored her, and she sped off furiously. I immediately blocked her number on my phone and removed her as a friend on social media, and immediately warned the group of friends not to talk to her because she's gone nuts. I've not spoken to her since that very day, and she also lost the other 5 friends of the group as well. After this situation, Lucy, I hope you're truly lonely now. For some context, I'm a 32-year-old female. This happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I work full-time as a researcher at a university, which is where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor or anything, and because of my age at the time, I could have easily been mistaken for just another student wandering around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I would prefer to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds outside, or sitting underneath a shady tree on a bench, enjoying the time that I was not sitting in a cramped corner of a lab. On one of these days, I was sitting on a bench enjoying the fresh air, and a male student walking by asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward kind of person, so even though I really would have preferred sitting alone, I said, sure. He initiated simple conversation, to which I obliged, but being careful to not be too forthcoming. He mentioned that he had seen which apartment building I came and went from, which slightly alarmed me, given that I had never seen this person before in my life. But I pushed the thought from my mind. After all, the weather had been decent lately, and I had spent nearly all my lunch hours for the past week outside. He asked if I was studying within the mentioned department, to which I told him that I was not a student, but rather I worked there. He told me that he was an engineering student, and then followed up with asking me out to coffee sometime. I apologized and told him that I had a boyfriend and would have to decline. We parted ways after that, and I assumed that I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or two went by, and I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench somewhere. Seemingly out of nowhere, the same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. Admittedly, I don't remember what he started talking to me about at first. My mind was reeling, and I was rather uncomfortable having to potentially turn this guy down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me again if we could go out for coffee sometime. I apologized and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and would not be meeting him for coffee. Again, he left after that. I was feeling rather anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt that I had to be too concerned. A few days later, I had finished work and was leaving the building to walk to where I had parked my car. The universities charge a fortune for parking passes, even if you're employed by them, so I had always opted for free street parking about a 10-minute walk away from campus. My walking route would take me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car traffic. Even pedestrian traffic was pretty sparse on the busiest of days. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I noticed him from my peripheral vision and didn't want to flat out turn around to stare at him. It wasn't uncommon to see someone else by any means. I was just always trying to be aware of my surroundings when walking the streets alone. I had to make a few turns coming up anyways, and the chance that they would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made all the turns I did, still walking on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. I still did not want to look at whoever this was. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of what I thought he was doing. I quickened my pace to a speedy walk. I was approaching the first of two busier streets before I would reach my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me, and this was the moment that I panicked. The moment that I was sure that he was indeed following me. After that, I started a full-out jog across the first of the busier streets. He ran to keep up behind me and was now on the same side of the street I was. I was now nearly at my car. I had to cross the last busy street and get about 100 meters and I would be there. But it was crossing the street that worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before it was clear enough to do so. If this were the case, he would catch up with me. As if the stars aligned, as soon as I made it running to the busy street, I had a gap to cross. I booked it as fast as I could, finally turning around once I had made it to look and yell at the man who had been pursuing me. It was him. I could have suspected, but now it was confirmed. It was the engineering student whom I had turned down for coffee. "Stop following me," I yelled at him from across the busy street. "Can I just talk to you?" he yelled back. I didn't even answer him. I mean, the answer should have been obvious from the start, and I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed and then chased me for about a kilometer. I keep moving quickly to my car, so determined to get the hell out of there that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. He had given up following me and never tried to cross the road, too, to my relief. I got home and broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I wasn't harmed, fortunately, but I was shook. I had some anxieties walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I would walk most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I even changed where I started parking for a time. A few weeks had passed since the incident, and I had not seen him around campus at all. I had started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally I would go to the student center to buy lunch instead. This one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall, and I heard a guy try and get someone's attention through the crowd. I look up, and it's him again, waving to me and trying to make his way through the people. I panicked, and even though I'm terribly shy, I started a scene and yelled at him to leave me the F alone. His face dropped instantly as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding, and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, was even more focused on my surroundings than I ever was before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then now, and I still work at the university. I'm so relieved to say that I never saw him again after the food court and hadn't had any other harrowing accounts on campus. I'm still diligent about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked the guy his name, so I couldn't even report an incident to campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad that I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before or after me. To give a little context, I used to work in an apartment complex. As a result, I've had my fair share of creepy encounters. Most residents keep to themselves and don't cause issues, probably about 95%, but the other 5% took up almost all my time. Isaac was one of the 5%. When he first rented his apartment, he definitely had stoner vibes, but he was nice enough and passed his background check. Almost immediately, however, he started causing issues. The lady next door complained that she could smell his smoke constantly. The guy downstairs complained that he could hear his stereo all hours of the day and night. Another resident accused him of following him home one night. The police were regularly there breaking up fights between him and his girlfriends. We caught him hiding 2 large dogs in his apartment, and he regularly let them run loose, which ultimately resulted in another dog and 2 people getting attacked. He accidentally discharged a gun in his apartment once. Needless to say, he caused a lot of issues. At first, he was very apologetic and said that he would make an effort to remedy the problems. But things kept getting worse, and after a year of weekly calls or notices from the office, he eventually became standoffish. One morning, I received a call from Isaac letting me know that he'd broken up with one of his girls and she wouldn't leave the apartment. He asked me to personally come up and remove her. I'm a small woman, so even if I wanted to take the risk, I physically wouldn't be capable of wrestling an angry woman out of his apartment. I suggested that he call the police. He then asked if I could make a maintenance man come up to remove her. I ordered to call the police on his behalf, but Isaac said that he didn't want to involve them and hung up. A few hours later, Isaac came down to the office with a jump drive and said that he needed to print out a 50-plus page document. Residents weren't technically allowed to use our office printer, but on the rare occasion someone asked to, I usually didn't say no. It was an easy way to build up good rapport. But between Isaac becoming such a problem tenant and how large his document was, I told him I couldn't print his document. I gave him the excuse that our paper/toner/print history was monitored and we would get in trouble for printing such a large document out for him. Not liking my answer, he started screaming about how it was BS, and he accused me of being useless, bringing up my refusal to fight his ex and power tripping. He called me all sorts of terrible names multiple times and said someone needed to bring me down a peg. I was pretty over him at this point and told him that if he was going to behave like a child that he needed to leave. He told me that I couldn't make a move, and bluntly I told him that he would leave or I would call the police and have him removed. I also told him that I would ban him from the office going forward. Normally I tried to kill the residents with kindness, but his lease was ending in a week and I didn't care anymore if he hated me. My threat seemed to work. He angrily knocked my pen holder over, then slammed both doors hard as he left. The following morning, a cop was waiting for me when I got to work. He asked if Isaac was a resident, and I confirmed he was. The officer explained that the body of a teen had been discovered the day before, and Isaac was the prime suspect. He was the last person to text the kid asking him to meet him where his body was found shortly after the message. The police believed Isaac had been paid to kill him, and based on the timing of the text and when the boy was discovered, Isaac would have had to have had left my office and gone directly there. Ultimately, the police wanted to use Isaac's move-out day as an opportunity to try and catch him. To nobody's surprise, he didn't show up. When I walked to his apartment to inspect for damage, there was a lot. I found a bank receipt from the day of the murder. Someone had wired him $17,000. I thankfully never saw Isaac again, and he was caught in another country a few months later, and thankfully is rotting in prison. So I'm not exactly sure where to post this, but I feel like this might be the best spot for it. I recently moved down to an apartment building all the way up to the top floor. My balcony is at the back of the building, and the view is mostly trees, but there's some houses and a street directly behind the apartment building, so I can see that too, and I hope that makes sense. I usually sit out on my balcony at night, getting high and listening to music. At night, the view is just darkness aside from the house porch lights and the road lit up by a street light. Most of the road view is covered by trees, but I can see a good amount of it. There's also no light for my balcony, so at night I just sit in the dark, aside from the light coming from my phone. So anyway, I was sitting there at around 10 p.m. or so, like I usually do, and I noticed movement from the road. When I looked down, I saw someone running down the road, like really fast. From my distance, it looked like this person was running faster than any human should. I was just watching when this person just stopped under a street lamp. Under the light, I could tell this person was a man. I also realized this person was now looking up at me. I got nervous, but I didn't move because I thought I could just be overthinking and maybe this guy wasn't actually looking directly at me. How could he? My phone wasn't on, so I was pretty much sitting in complete darkness. Could he really see me from all the way down there? I just kept sitting there, hoping the guy would leave, but then I saw him waving at me. Now I knew he was looking at me. I was too uncomfortable to do anything and couldn't even go back inside. I just sat there, getting increasingly nervous. My thoughts started running wild. I thought this guy might find my apartment and try to break in. I also thought that they would somehow just sprint forward and climb up the building to get to me or something. But as I kept staring at this guy waving at me, a sudden feeling of dread came over me. That was when I started grabbing my things to go back inside. But then I saw that he stopped waving. He reached both of his arms out to the side and started swaying his body side to side, bending his knees as he moved and wiggling his arms around like a weird dance move. At this point, I was incredibly unsettled and just wanted to go back inside, but I was also slightly intrigued in a way, and I guess I wanted to see what he might do next. Soon, the feelings of dread and unease took over and continued closing up all of my stuff, and I went inside. There was a window in the room next to the balcony where you could see down to the same area, so I peeked outside trying to stay hidden behind the wall. I saw this guy still moving around, side to side, but he soon stopped and I saw him just start booking it down the road again. I made sure my front door was locked and I went back to my room, locking the bedroom door as well. The bedroom window looks out to the same direction, so I made sure that the guy was gone and closed my curtains. I didn't really sleep that night. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that I had. This happened a couple of nights ago and I haven't seen this guy since then. I've still been sitting out in the balcony, but I've been getting really paranoid when I'm out there at night, so I don't stay out for as long as I did. I don't really know what to make of this whole thing. I don't know who that guy was, or maybe what he was. I get really uncomfortable and paranoid when I think about that night, like I'm back in that moment feeling those exact feelings again. Also, since then, I get occasional waves of dread, like at times throughout the day I get the feeling that I'm being watched. I hope this feeling goes away soon, and I'm really hoping I don't see that guy ever again. Yesterday, my daughter, who's 8 years old, and I went to one of those app-based games. It's like a scavenger hunt, but digital. We had to follow the map. It asked questions, and we had to solve riddles and things like that. The theme is one of our favorite books and movies. She and I went to the game with some of our friends and their kids about the same age. There were hundreds of people in costumes roaming around downtown, trying to save the person in the game. My daughter has a very rare health issue. I won't go into details for privacy reasons. Everything was fine, and then she wasn't, and we had to leave early before the game was done. So we started our walk back to our car that was in a parking garage ran by the city. We took our time. The elevator was broken, so we had to walk up 3 floors. I told the daughter that we will take our time and her equipment is in the car. As we were walking to the stairwell, a man follows us in. The hair on my neck stands up. I get a chill and goosebumps all over. I carry pepper spray on my keyring. I tell my daughter to walk in front of me and take her time. I unlock the trigger on the pepper spray. This man could have walked around us at any time, but he didn't. He stayed right behind us. When we got to the 3rd level, I have my arm locked right around hers. Our car is the first one, right there next to the stairwell. He follows us out to the door. I quickly unlock my car and pretty much toss her inside and close the door. I turn around to face him. He looks at me, doesn't say a word, and walks back into the stairwell. There was no one in the parking garage. All the employees had already left for the day. There are no cameras in this specific garage. If I would have known that, I would have picked a different one. Now I even wonder if the elevator was really broken because I don't remember seeing signs on the door when we got there. We didn't ride the elevator down because my daughter likes taking the stairs, but going down is way easier for her than going up. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit r/LetsReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, cheese is just scared milk.